So, let me tell you about how it all began. My name's Jake Thompson, and I'm what you might call an odd fit for a small, conservative town. I'm a Democrat, and I don't really buy into the whole religious thing. Yeah, you can imagine the raised eyebrows and hushed gossip that follows a guy like me around here. But life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs, and in my case, that curveball came in the form of Emily Miller. She's smart, beautiful, and her family? Well, they're about as conservative and religious as they come. You'd think we were from different planets, but somehow, we found common ground. I remember the first time I met Emily's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. It was like stepping into a whole other world. They greeted me with polite smiles that barely masked their skepticism. I could practically hear the wheels turning in their heads, wondering what their daughter was doing with a guy like me. But Emily, she's always been the fearless one. She stood by my side, hand in hand, as we faced the judgmental glances and whispered remarks. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but love has this funny way of making you believe that anything is possible. So, despite her parents' disapproval and the doubts of our community, we decided to tie the knot. Our wedding day was a whirlwind of emotions, nerves, excitement, and a hint of defiance. As we exchanged vows, I couldn't help but steal a glance at Emily's parents. Their expressions softened, if only for a moment, as they watched their daughter pledge her love to someone they never imagined she'd choose. And just like that, our journey together began. A union forged in the face of adversity, full of hope and determination. Sure, there were challenges ahead, but in that moment, all that mattered was the love we shared and the promise of a future together. So yeah, that's how it all started. Two unlikely souls finding each other in a small town where they least expected it. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that love has a funny way of defying expectations and proving that sometimes, the most unlikely beginnings lead to the greatest adventures. Man, I never thought things would start falling apart like this. It's like watching a beautiful painting slowly peel away, revealing cracks beneath the surface. Emily and I used to be so tight, you know? But lately, it's like we're two ships passing in the night. I remember the days when we couldn't get enough of each other. Every moment together felt like a scene from a cheesy romance movie. But now it's like there's this invisible barrier between us, and no matter how hard I try to break through, I just can't seem to reach her. It all started a few months back. Emily started pulling away, bit by bit. At first, I brushed it off as stress from work or something like that. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, it became clear that something deeper was going on. I'd come home from work, excited to see her, and she'd barely acknowledge my presence. Conversations that used to flow effortlessly now felt forced and stilted. It's like she's here, but she's not really here, you know? It's like she's checked out, mentally and emotionally. I've tried everything to bridge the gap between us. Date nights, heartfelt conversations, even little surprises here and there. But it's like banging my head against a brick wall. Nothing seems to work. And it's not just Emily pulling away. It's like her whole family is in on it too. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, used to welcome me with open arms whenever I visited. But now it's like I'm an unwelcome guest in my own home. I can't help but wonder what went wrong. Was it something I did? Something I said? Or maybe it's just the natural course of things, relationships fading away with time like old photographs left out in the sun too long. Whatever it is, it's tearing me apart inside. I miss the connection we used to have, the easy laughter, the shared dreams. But now it feels like we're strangers living under the same roof, pretending everything's okay when it's anything but. And I don't know how much longer I can keep up this charade before everything comes crashing down around us. There are moments in life that hit you like a truck, knocking the breath right out of you. The kind of moments where time seems to stand still, and you're left reeling, trying to make sense of what just happened. Well, I had one of those moments, and let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. It all started innocently enough. I was just minding my own business, going through my usual routine, when I stumbled upon something I never expected to find. Emails. Not just any emails, mind you, but emails that weren't meant for my eyes. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. There, in black and white, were messages between my wife, Emily, and someone else. Someone who definitely wasn't me. I felt like I was in a daze as I read through those messages. Words that cut like knives, revealing a truth I never wanted to face. My mind was racing, trying to process it all. How could this be happening? How could Emily do this to me? As I read on, the reality of it all sank in. My marriage, the one thing I thought was solid and true, was built on lies. Lies that I didn't even know existed until now. It was like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me stumbling in the dark. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal. Anger at Emily for betraying my trust, sadness for the life I thought we had, and betrayal for the years I had invested in our relationship. But amidst all the turmoil, there was one thing I knew for sure: I couldn't ignore what I had discovered. I couldn't pretend like everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. So, with a heavy heart and a mind full of uncertainty, I confronted Emily. The look on her face said it all. Guilt, shame, and maybe even a hint of relief that the truth was finally out in the open. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. As I walked away from that conversation, I knew that my life would never be the same. The trust that once bound us together was broken, shattered into a million pieces that could never be put back together. And though the pain was unbearable, I knew that somehow, someway, I would find a way to pick up the pieces and move on. The moment I found out about Emily's affair, my world came crashing down like a ton of bricks. It was like someone had sucker punched me right in the gut. And you know what's worse? It wasn't some hearsay or a gut feeling. I had concrete evidence staring me in the face. So, what did I do? Well, I didn't sit around wallowing in self-pity, that's for sure. No, sir. I took decisive action. First things first, I filed those divorce papers. I wasn't about to stick around and play pretend while my heart got stomped on. It wasn't just about me, though. See, there was this other guy involved too. A real piece of work, let me tell you. I made damn sure his girlfriend knew what he'd been up to behind her back. No one deserves to be kept in the dark like that. Legal proceedings? Oh, they were a nightmare. It's like every time I stepped foot in that courthouse, my stomach tied up in knots. But I stood my ground. I wasn't about to let Emily or her family walk all over me. Speaking of her family, let's talk about Mr. and Mrs. Miller for a sec. They were never big fans of mine, but you should have seen the way they acted when all this mess came out. Suddenly, I was the bad guy. But you know what? I didn't care. I had to do what was right for me. Sure, it wasn't easy. There were nights I couldn't sleep, replaying everything over and over in my head. But I had to keep moving forward. I had to find closure, even if it felt like grasping at straws sometimes. And you know what? Eventually, I did find it. Maybe not in the way I expected, but I found my peace. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing up for yourself, even when the whole world seems to be against you. So there I was, sitting in the living room of Emily's parents' house, feeling like I'd been hit by a ton of bricks. Mr. and Mrs. Miller were across from me, their faces twisted in anger and disappointment. I could feel the tension thickening the air, suffocating me as I tried to find the right words to defend myself. It all started when Emily and I decided to call it quits. Our marriage had been on the rocks for a while, and despite our best efforts, we just couldn't seem to make things work. We agreed to an amicable split, or so I thought. Little did I know, the storm was just brewing. Emily's parents had never been my biggest fans. From the moment we got together, they made it clear that they didn't think I was good enough for their daughter. But I never thought they'd stoop so low as to blame me for the end of our marriage. The accusations came fast and furious, like bullets from a machine gun. They accused me of everything under the sun, from cheating on Emily to neglecting her emotional needs. It was like they were living in some alternate reality where I was the villain in their daughter's life story. I tried to defend myself, to explain that things weren't as black and white as they seemed. But they weren't interested in hearing my side of the story. To them, I was just another obstacle in their quest to protect their precious Emily. As the tirade continued, I felt something inside me snap. Anger bubbled up from deep within, threatening to consume me whole. How dare they sit there and judge me without knowing the first thing about me? How dare they tear me down with their words? But amidst the anger, there was also sadness, a deep, aching sadness that threatened to drown me in its depths. These were the people who had once welcomed me into their family with open arms, who had smiled and laughed with me over family dinners and holiday gatherings. And now, here they were, tearing me apart with their accusations. In the end, I knew there was no reasoning with them. They had made up their minds about me long before this moment, and nothing I said or did would change that. So I sat there in silence, letting their words wash over me like waves crashing against the shore. When it was finally over, I got up and left without a word. There was nothing left for me here, no love, no understanding, no common ground. Just bitterness and resentment, hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. As I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong. How had a love that once felt so right turned into something so twisted and broken? I didn't have the answers, and maybe I never would. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward, one day at a time, until the pain of this moment faded into nothing more than a distant memory. I remember it like it was yesterday. The tension was thick in the air as I sat across the table from Emily's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. The weight of what I was about to reveal felt like a ton of bricks on my shoulders, but I knew it was something that needed to be done. Emily had been my world once upon a time, but everything changed when I discovered her infidelity. It shattered me, tore apart the fabric of our marriage, and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love and trust. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I pulled out the evidence I had gathered. Text messages, emails, photos, all undeniable proof of Emily's affair. My hands were shaking as I laid them out on the table, each piece of evidence a damning indictment of her betrayal. Mr. and Mrs. Miller's expressions shifted from confusion to shock as they took in the evidence before them. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the realization slowly dawning on them as they processed the truth of their daughter's actions. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you deserve to know the truth." There was a long, heavy silence as they stared at the evidence in front of them. And then, finally, Mrs. Miller spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to say. I never thought Emily would do something like this." Mr. Miller reached across the table, his hand resting on mine in a gesture of understanding. "Thank you for telling us, Jake. This must have been incredibly difficult for you." I nodded, unable to find the words to express the tumult of emotions swirling inside me. It wasn't just about revenge or vindication, it was about honesty and closure. I needed them to see the truth, to understand why our marriage had crumbled. As the reality of Emily's betrayal sunk in, I could see the pain etched on her parents' faces. They had always been so proud of their daughter, so certain of her innocence. Now, they were forced to confront the painful truth, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. But amidst the hurt and the heartache, there was also a sense of relief. The truth was out in the open now, and we could finally begin to heal, even if the scars would never fully fade. In that moment of revelation, everything changed. Apologies were exchanged, perspectives shifted, and we began to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. It was a painful process, but it was also the first step towards a brighter future, one where the truth would always prevail, no matter how painful it might be. So, there I was, just minding my own business, trying to sort out the chaos that was my life post-divorce, when bam! An email pops up from none other than my ex-wife, Emily. It had been a whole year since we last exchanged words, and let me tell you, that year of silence felt like a decade. Opening that email was like opening Pandora's box. Emily's words came crashing through the screen, dripping with blame and bitterness. She was pointing fingers, dredging up old wounds, and laying it all at my feet like I was some kind of villain in her story. But you know what? I wasn't having it. Sure, I could have let her words get to me. I could have let them worm their way into my brain, gnawing at my self-esteem like hungry rats. But I didn't. I stood my ground, held my head high, and reminded myself that I had acted with integrity every step of the way. It wasn't easy, though. Reading those accusations stung like a slap to the face. It brought back memories of the arguments, the tears, the sleepless nights spent wondering where it all went wrong. But amidst the pain, there was also a strange sense of relief. You see, that email marked the end of a chapter filled with turmoil. It was like closing the lid on a box of demons and finally being able to breathe again. I realized that I didn't need Emily's validation to know that I was a good person. I didn't need her approval to move on with my life. Of course, there were still echoes of her presence in my world. Memories lingered in every corner of our shared past, and there were moments when I caught myself wondering what could have been. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the knowledge that I was better off without her toxicity weighing me down. So, I replied to her email, not with anger or resentment, but with calm resolve. I wished her well, told her that I hoped she found peace, and then I hit send. And just like that, I closed the door on that chapter of my life, ready to face whatever came next with courage and grace. Because at the end of the day, I knew one thing for certain: I may have been battered and bruised by the storm of our marriage, but I emerged from the wreckage stronger and more resilient than ever before. And that, my friends, is a victory worth celebrating.